So welcome to Lecture 6 of Moral Psychology. I hope you had a good break in reading week and that you're ready for part 3 of this course, where we look at whether discoveries in moral psychology have implications for ethics. So here's our question. This will be the question guiding us in part 3 of the course, and it's also the question for your final in-term assessment. Could scientific discoveries undermine or support ethical principles? Now let's start with a negative answer to this question. So here's a famous negative answer. Here's Kant in the Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Models. No, Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. So this famous text, he says, look, I'm translating very roughly. Here philosophy stands in a predicament. There's a predicament. Here philosophy needs to prove its integrity as the keeper or the self-sustainer of the laws of morality. Therefore, everything which is empirical is as an ingredient to the principle of morality, not only entirely improper, but also to the integrity of morality, highly detrimental, so says Kant. He goes on, this bad or even base way of thinking, to put the principle of morality under empirical causes or laws, well, you can't warn too often or too strongly against that, because human reason is happy to replace morality with a bastard made up from limbs of diverse ancestry. And that bastard, it looks like anything you want to see in it, but nothing, says Kant, looks nothing like virtue. So three things. So first of all, I take it Kant is giving a negative answer to the question here, a strongly worded negative answer, and one that has been influential, continues to be influential. The second thing is that I can't find any argument for this claim. Now, I'm not a Kant scholar, so I'm sure, someone will be able to find an argument for this claim somewhere in there, but it seems to me that it's just Kant having a go, as far as I can work out. And then the third thing is kind of puzzling. How can you both be, on the one hand, a bastard and something which is created by just sort of thrusting together limbs from diverse ancestry? I don't think that really makes sense. I think Kant's got a bit lost with the metaphor. But again, I'm no Kant scholar, and so I'm sure there's something more serious going on there than that. What you see is a strongly worded no to the question. So let's take a look. How is it that philosophers do ethics? Is there already room in the way that they do ethics for discoveries about moral psychology? Well, here's Rawls in a very famous passage. He says, one may think of moral theory at first as the attempt to describe our moral capacity. Now, when I read this, I thought, wow, Rawls is really into moral psychology. Right? He really wants to understand something about humans' moral capacities. But Rawls goes on and actually doesn't want to do that at all. He says, what's required is a formulation of a set of principles which, when conjoined to our beliefs and knowledge of the circumstances, would lead us to make these judgments with their supporting reasons, were we to apply these principles. So when Rawls talks about moral capacity, I took him to mean the capacities that humans have to deal with moral dilemmas and situations demanding moral responses or moral judgments or moral behaviours. But that's not exactly what Rawls has in mind. What he really has in mind is that there are some judgments that he makes, and he supposes that, I suppose, other people make similar judgments. Who knows, maybe not. Maybe that's not essential. On reflection, so do a lot of reflection and you make a judgment about particular cases, and then what you do is you try to formulate a set of principles which captures those judgments in the sense that he defines. That's to say that if you did have knowledge of the principles and you were working through them and deriving conclusions and so on, then together with information about the situation, you would arrive back at the judgments that you had actually made. So that's Rawls' program. And I think it's clear here that there isn't any room for the involvement of moral psychology, because Rawls takes these reflective judgments to be the kind of things that philosophers make by reflecting on situations, rather than discoveries about the actual way that people might make judgments in real situations. That's not supposed to be particularly relevant here, I take it. So here's a paradigm of doing ethics, one which I think has been very influential. This is called the method of reflective equilibrium by Rawls. And if we follow this method, we have no room for moral psychology at all. So what do we think that discoveries about moral psychology might do? Well, one kind of fairly bold outcome is that they might undermine the project of reflective equilibrium. We might decide on the basis of discoveries about moral psychology that the project of reflective equilibrium is not a sensible way to make discoveries about ethics. That would be a bold thing. I think we should also be open to the idea that we can make some more modest contributions to ethics. So it might be that there are, in thinking about particular cases, so thinking about, for example, abortion or euthanasia, some intuitions that you have, by which I mean some judgments that seem quite compelling to you on reflection. So I'm not talking about what we called moral intuitions earlier. And moral psychology, discoveries in moral psychology might cause us to endorse some of those and reject others. And so it might alter our views about something like abortion or euthanasia without having any particular global effect. So this would be a modest outcome. And I think that would be an interesting thing. But there's also a more ambitious goal that we might have. So we might want to use moral psychology to altogether eliminate objections to some normative ethical theories and debunk arguments in favour of competing theories. So this would be super ambitious. Here the idea would be that discoveries in moral psychology can completely change the state of debate in ethics, bring about a revolution. So what I want to suggest for now is just that we ought to keep in mind all of these possibilities, and all of them are interesting in their own way. But let me start by giving you a highlight of what might be to come with the ambitious one. I'm just going to give you a small preview. So Audi gives us a very important basis for thinking about self-evident propositions. And while not everybody would accept that Audi's right about the way to characterise self-evident propositions and their usefulness, I think that this is a very clear characterisation of a way of doing ethics which is incompatible with a role for moral psychology. So what does Audi say? First of all, he characterises what it is for a proposition to be self-evident in a very careful way. And this is useful because you can see, following the literature, there's lots of confusion about this, and Audi effectively sorts this out, in my view. He says, self-evident propositions are truths meeting two conditions. In virtue of adequately understanding them, one has justification for believing them, and believing them on the basis of adequately understanding them entails knowing them. So I think that's a nice, clear way of characterising what it is for something to be self-evident. Now Audi goes on and talks about intuition, and it's very important here that when Audi talks about intuition, he's not talking of what we earlier called moral intuitions, right? What he's talking about here is self-evident propositions, or beliefs in self-evident propositions. So for Audi, this is something quite different from what we're talking about. So I would want to say when one believes a self-evident proposition on the basis of adequately understanding it, then one has an intuition. That's how I think Audi is using the term intuition here. So he thinks that intuition is a resource for all of philosophy, but perhaps nowhere more than in ethics. Aha, this is why it's relevant. In particular, Audi thinks that episodic intuitions, so beliefs on the basis of adequately understanding self-evident propositions, can serve as data. Beliefs that derive from them derive on the face of it justification. So it's not they can't be overridden, but on the face of it they're justified. So if we follow Audi, then a method like Rawls' reflective equilibrium or other methods in ethics make perfect sense. We have this foundation of things that we are justified in believing in because we have believed them on the basis of adequately understanding them and therefore know them. So Audi. What's the response to this? Well, here's Singer. I'm not offering an argument here. I'm just telling you what the response to this idea is. So the probably most careful thinker in this area is Peter Singer, and we're going to spend a long time with this 2005 article on ethics and intuitions. Here's Singer's perspective. A dominant theme, says Singer, in normative ethics for the past century or more has been the debate between those who support a systematic normative ethical theory. Utilitarianism and other forms of consequentialism have been the leading contenders, and those who ground their normative ethics on intuitions. So I think this is a nice contrast. I don't know whether Singer's right. I'm not an expert on ethics, but it seems reasonably plausible that one can divide the territory up into these two main sides. Why is that significant? Well, Singer goes on the chief weapons of opponents of utilitarianism have been examples intended to show that the dictates of utilitarianism clash with moral intuitions that we all share. And Singer, I think, convincingly gives many examples of this. He gives many examples of this. So the classic argumentative strategy, I'm sure that you will have come across this as well if you're coming from a philosophy background, is to provide various scenarios, and it's scenarios involving this or that thing happening. There's a patient who goes into a hospital and needs one particular organ, a kidney, and another patient who goes into the same hospital on the same day and needs a different organ, and so on. And then the question is, well, should the surgeon sort of carve up a perfectly healthy person, killing one person in order to save 5 people by distributing the organs? And utilitarians are supposed to say, yes, that's what you do, and then they sort of see whether they need to do that, refine their theories, and their opponents say that's why utilitarianism is wrong, right? So what we're doing here is thinking about a moral intuition that we all share. Allegedly, it's wrong to harm the healthy person, and using that to attack utilitarianism, causing the utilitarian theorist either to revise her theory or abandon it altogether. So this kind of, I think this sort of rings true, doesn't it? Why is this relevant? Well, what Singer goes on to say is that advances in our understanding of moral psychology, although they don't themselves directly imply any normative conclusions, they undermine some conceptions of doing ethics which themselves have normative conclusions, specifically the one that we were just talking about, right? Which conceptions of ethics? Well, they undermine those conceptions of ethics that tend to be too respectful of intuitions. Our better understanding of ethics gives us grounds for being less respectful of them. So linking it back to Audi, in my view, what Singer is saying is this: once we discover the reasons why we feel disposed to make certain judgments and strongly attached to them, even on reflection, once we understand the causes behind those, we will see that it's very unlikely that these are self-evident propositions. That's to say, it's very unlikely that we, in understanding them, and believing them on the basis that we understand them, do indeed therefore come to know them, because it's very unlikely that they're true in the first place. That's what Singer says. Singer says that this is a sort of illusion generated by the way that our moral psychology works. So that, if it's true, suggests that there's a potentially quite powerful argument from Singer, both against certain ways of doing philosophy and also more generally perhaps in favour of the, as Singer says, systematic theories. Green takes a different line, but one which is closely related. Green says that science can advance ethics by revealing the hidden inner workings of our moral judgments. Well, that is Singer's view as well, especially the ones that we make intuitively. Now here it's tricky, because when Green says intuitively, he is talking about moral intuitions in our sense, those unreflective moral judgments. And of course, Audi and Rawls and the others are talking about things which are highly reflective judgments about particular cases, which after a lot of reflection seem to be true just in virtue of having understood them. So there's a complication here in terms of what people are talking about when they're talking about intuitions. Oh, Steve, it's getting very complicated, isn't it? Let's roll back here. So Green is focusing on spontaneous judgments which seem compelling in response to situations. And Green says once those inner workings are revealed, we may have less confidence in some ethical theories that are explicitly or implicitly based on them. And when Green says may, he of course means that we will have less confidence in them. So this is the idea that through moral psychology we can eliminate objections to some more normative ethical theories and debunk arguments in favour of their opponents. And so we'll end up with some kind of utilitarianism, essentially. That's essentially the idea that Green and Singer seem to be going for at their most ambitious. So that's exciting, and that's all to come. But what I want to do is to work there slowly. I want to work up to that slowly by starting off with a very modest claim and seeing how that goes. Because the modest claim, first of all, is interesting and controversial, and secondly, the work that we do in working out whether or not the modest claim is true will directly support an evaluation of the more ambitious claim. So it's a very good place for us to start. See you in a moment.